Welcome to the deep dive discussion video of Stillborn. I said in the review that it was 2017/18. That's just because I've seen either date attributed to it. I think there was a difference between when they finished production and when they were able to get widespread distribution. Regardless, I want to go into some finer details of this movie and talk about elements of it that I felt didn't work, elements that I felt did work, and how I think the ones that didn't could have been solved fairly simply if some effort had been applied. And I kind of want to talk about the ones that did work right up front. I thought the element that worked the best, in my opinion, was the very, very end. The setup where you still don't know if something supernatural is going on or if it's postpartum psychosis. I thought that was really well done. And it wasn't just the ending. They had to set that up throughout. They had to make it so that while the husband is watching, or, not watching, listening to the tape, they're making sure that as the creepy voice is happening, she's not on camera. And they had to establish earlier on that she is able to make her own creepy voices fairly accurately, even going so far as to startle him over video chat. So it lends an air of what's actually going on that remains unanswered, and I actually like that. Because the entirety of the movie, when I talk about character isolation, it's an element of a horror film that happens somewhat frequently that I don't necessarily think works terribly well unless it's handled very delicately. The notion of there's a universal evil, but it's only happening to one character. So everybody around them is wondering what is going on with them. Are they going crazy? What's causing this erratic behavior? And what's spiraling them? And then it becomes a movie that is less figuring out what's going on with the evil and how to conquer it, and more there's a term that I try to avoid, but I do sometimes use it. I like to call it, well, I guess that's the point. I don't like to call it this, but I do sometimes call it sitcom horror. It's the kind of thing where you're in a situation and it could be solved with a little bit of honesty and 5 minutes of decent open discussion. But regardless, you have characters that wind up at odds with each other because they're not talking. One's afraid that they're going to look and sound crazy because they've already been treated crazy, so on and so forth, and it becomes more of a sitcom in a scary setting. So it does have to be handled delicately. The best example I can think of an element of that worked was obviously Rosemary's Baby. Similarities, obviously. So, but it left it unanswered for the audience, and I really, really did like that. Now, elements of this that didn't work for me, that could have been fixed fairly easily. One, if you're going to have character isolation where a character is spiraling down the drain, you need to have a starting point. And we never really got that. The opening credits had the birth. And we are introduced to the character as she's already hit not her lowest point, but a low point. She's grieving for the loss of her child, and then pretty much immediately after that, the supernatural stuff potentially starts. So we never really got a good look at these characters interacting with one another on a normal social level for us to really understand the nature of the spiral And I think that that's a critical element of it, to see the before so that we have context for the after. uh, and that would have been a pretty simple thing to do. I'm not talking about having, an entire first act devoted to it. I'm just, give me 2 or 3 minutes of them having fun in the park, or whatever, showing them meeting each other for the first time, and then fast forward, hey, 5 years later, we're married and she's pushing out a couple kids. Other elements that I think could have been done well or done better is I covered this a little bit in the review when I talked about the nursery, but I thought the set dressing really was very lackluster. And the set in general, I see this element happen a lot. When you have a horror film that has a budget behind it without a massive budget behind it, when you get one that has a massive budget behind it and they can really take off, films like Insidious and things that really kind of go mainstream, then they can go nuts with it, go effects heavy, go whatever setting they want, and that's awesome if they can make that work. Then you have the totally opposite side of the spectrum, where you have no budget, or maybe a couple of grand in their pocket, and the actors are working for sandwiches, and you do what you can with what you got, and you don't ask questions. You're basically filming in your uncle's backyard as much as you can, working off the favors of your family and friends. That also is fantastic. Then you wind up with a movie like this that I think wound up somewhere in the middle, where they got themselves a halfway decent budget, and now you have a setting that doesn't make sense. Here's my problem with it. And it goes back to what I said in the review about the off-brand generic version of things. There's a trick in writing, and in screenwriting in particular, that if you want to maintain focus, i.e., be lazy, and have your characters laser line focus on what you want them to focus on, rather than setting a situation and letting them surprise you, then you have to remove real life obstacles from them. I think it would have been more interesting from a character development point of view and from an audience engagement point of view if we had seen a real person on the screen. And we didn't. There were no real life situations going on. There were no needing to go grocery shopping. There was no needing to buy diapers. There was no going to a job. There was no renewing your registration at the DMV. There was no real real life moments for the character. She existed to take care of the baby in a house that was way too big for her because her husband worked at the firm, no name, and he was working on the deal, no information, and they had oodles and oodles and oodles of money so that you don't need to worry about those real life situations. Would they have added a massive layer of complexity and nuance to writing those scenes, trying to get the characters to interact with normal life difficulties on a ground level circumstance? Yes, it would have been terribly difficult to write that in. But I also think it would have been important, and I think that when faced with that opportunity, from a screenwriting point of view, you have a choice. You can embrace that difficult nature and make it work for you, or you can write your way out of it. And the easiest way to do that is, well, they're rich. He works at a law firm. Oh, he's partner at a law firm. What firm? Doesn't matter. He's working out a deal. He can't be home. What deal? Doesn't matter. It's too easy. It's lazy. And that's the biggest sin that I can, attribute to this movie is the laziness, and that's a prime example of it. Uh, so you have this you have the character, and she is trying to deal with this in a situation where she has her neighbor, who even makes a joke of the Stepford Wives thing. uh, and ultimately, there's nothing for the audience to really latch onto and an identification with. One of my favorite scenes of Rosemary's Baby was the main character in the phone booth, and we never really had that kind of moment in this. Um, and I just think it's a shame. I think that a good example of this would be Michael Ironside's character. He is he's a great actor in my opinion. He is one of the biggest reasons I watch this movie. Um, I just geek out when I see his name. And his role in this movie left me kind of meh. And I think that that comes from the writing. You have a therapist that understands the difference between uh, uh, postpartum depression and postpartum psychosis, and the dangers of crossing that line, and how bad it can get, and the difference in treatment that would be required for that. And you leave it up to one question based on trust. Have you been experiencing any of this? Any hallucinations, auditory, visual, that kind of thing? Nope. Good enough for me. Here's your meds. That's lazy. That is not how a therapist would approach it. That is not how a therapist would leave it. That is, I mean, a lazy one, sure. It's just, I don't know. I can go on and on, but that is pretty much the general consensus I come up with about this. I think that if they had given more time to bring the characters down from the high castle of mansion blah, and brought them down to, they talked about the apartment that they had, that dump. Well, I love that dump. Show me in that, show them in that dump. I think that would have worked well. Make them struggle. Make him have to, go to work in grubby diner, and have her also, have to waitress in that diner, and the interactions that they have there. Bring them down to a real level, and make it difficult for them. Make it difficult for your writer to explore that with them, and then go from there. I think that's basically it. I would love to hear your opinions on this. If you agree with me, if you disagree with me, if you think I'm full of it, if you think maybe I raised some good points, either way, I would really love to hear from you. Please leave comments in the description, or in the discussion down below, not the description. And I promise I will read them and I will engage with them. And until next time, thank you.